Good afternoon. I trust you all enjoyed your lunch. This is the Fireside Chat with cross-discipline system actors, and if it sort of sounds like this is the panel where we put everybody else who wouldn't fit in another one, you're right. It's actually kind of a mix of actors at the state level and at the local level. And I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself. And we'll start with Dagny Stapleton.
Hi. Hi. I'm Dagny Stapleton. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Association of Counties. That's all 17 counties in the state of Nevada, and their commissioners make up our board. We represent counties on common issues in the Nevada legislature and Nevada state regulatory bodies, and provide other services to counties. I've worked for that organization since 2013. I've worked on many issues on behalf of counties, public lands policy, tax policy, budget issues, even marijuana policy. And of course, I also work on indigent defense policy as part of my role on behalf of counties in Nevada. I'm a member of the Indigent Defense Commission in Nevada, the Supreme Court's Indigent Defense Commission, and have worked on legislation at the Nevada legislature regarding funding for indigent defense in Nevada, as well as policy in Nevada relating to indigent defense.
Thank you, Dagny. And now I'd ask Deb Assad to introduce herself. She is filling in for Secretary John Wetzel, and I'm interested in getting the perspective from a corrections institute or organization.
Thank you. Here we go. I'm Deb Assad. I'm Special Assistant to Secretary Wetzel. I've been with our agency for 29 years. I started inside one of our facilities when it opened up, worked my way up through the system. Have been with the head of the agency for a number of years. Secretary Wetzel has been with us since 2011. He came through Governor Corbett's administration and now Governor Wolf. And I would say he's probably the most effective, amazing person in that role that we've ever had, making great change for our agency and for the population. And he sends his regards. He's sorry he couldn't be here. He had something come up with the governor's office at the last minute.
Thank you, Deb. And I'll turn now to my colleague, Carlton Moore.
Hi, I'm Carlton Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Office of Criminal Justice Services. I've served in that role since 2005 when my boss left, and I thought I would do this for the last 18 months of the Bob Taft administration, and I've been doing this ever since. I'm also the president of the National Criminal Justice Association, and that's an association made up of my counterparts all across the country. I'm also kind of feel like I'm coming home a little bit because I do want to point out I am a graduate of American University's Washington College of Law. And probably one of the best experiences I had in law school is that you have to do this thing where you decide which side of a case you want to argue, and then you're assigned to that side. So you might do that in a moot court competition or something like that. And so you really engage in your argument, you figure out all the best parts of your argument, and you come to the conclusion that no reasonable person could argue against you. And then once you do that, they tell you, now you have to argue off brief, and you have to argue the other side. And you start to see that there are weaknesses in the arguments that you've been making, and there's strengths in the perspectives of other sides. And I really think this would be a good time for all of us to do a little on brief and off brief.
And John Rego.
Thank you, American U and OJP, for this opportunity. I'm a law professor at Duquesne. I'm also special counsel in Allegheny County for our Criminal Justice Advisory Board. We are the ones who are tasked with pulling all of these pieces together to try to make some sense of this, and I'd like to take the folks from California home with me to Pittsburgh so we can get started. I guess they're too busy. You know, I've dealt with a lot of this stuff early on in my career as a federal judge's law clerk, and I saw too much of this in the abstract. You know, those of us who went to law school, we understand our Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights under Miranda and Messiah, and the critical stage and when it attaches, but until you see things like I saw 10 years out of law school when I first met and have since become dear friends with Kirk Bloodsworth, the first DNA exoneree in the United States from death row. And largely his case fell apart because of a Sixth Amendment issue, among many other issues. I think it was at that point that I realized that this is not an abstract experience. And I think Secretary Wetzel last year commented about the Sixth Amendment, and he was questioning its continuing validity, much less its application. I think it's a good conversation to have. And just to echo what Deb said, Secretary Wetzel really has set the tone for this conversation in Pennsylvania. As many of you probably know, we're the last state in the union that does not, as a matter of state policy, fund our public defenders' offices. And so our counties are left to fend for themselves. And we are a fairly rural state, other than Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And so we'll try to incubate these ideas in Allegheny County because we're, I think, big enough to have consequences and small enough that all of the players on the team can work well together. Thank you.
Thank you, John. My name is Jack Cutrone. I'm a senior policy advisor for the National Criminal Justice Association. In a former life, I was the director of the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, which is the state administering agency in Illinois, which I'm going to ask Carlton to explain in a moment. And before that, I spent about almost 30 years as a defense lawyer in private practice. And I have to make the observation that listening to all the speakers today, especially the speakers from the prosecutor's offices and from the police departments, it really strikes home with me that things have changed from when I used to be accused of being the scumbucket who represented that dirtbag. Attitudes seem to have changed a lot since then, which is certainly a healthy thing for the system. Carlton, I am going to start out with you explaining what a state administering agency is.
You know, people ask me that all the time. I still haven't come up with a very good answer. But really what your job is, you're an SAA because the criminal justice, the federal criminal justice funds that come to your state, the governor has to designate someone to administer those funds. And so there's a criminal justice SAA in our state, that's me. We have one for Homeland Security funds. We have some for other types of funds. So that's probably the thing that people know most about you, is that you give out money. And for NCJA, our members all give out that same fund, the JAG fund, the Justice Assistance Grant. But you have a lot of other duties that go beyond handing out money. One of the great things about being the SAA is that there is no particular part of the criminal justice system that you advocate for or against. Your interest really is in the entire system. And so we fund research. We do our own research. I have a really good research staff. We supply technical assistance to all parts of the criminal justice system, whether it's corrections, law enforcement, victim services. We are, one of the best things about being an SAA is that you play what's called, I think, a convener role, where lots of times you are the person bringing people together. Now, you might bring them together because they incorrectly think they're going to get some money out of it. But the fact is that you still have the ability to bring people together and to really look at problems from a systematic approach and come up with solutions that satisfy everyone to a certain extent. So that's really the main role. There's a lot of other things that SAAs do, but the main thing I would say is that your job is really charged with looking at the entire criminal justice system. You administer those criminal justice funds throughout your state, and then you bring people together to deal with criminal justice issues, whether that's on a statewide basis or on the community level.
Thanks, Carlton. Part of the, as I said, this is both, the panel represents both state actors and state level actors and local level actors. And one of the participants, Deb, is from the Department of Corrections. And, you know, when I first saw that, I said, well, what exactly is the interest of the Department of Corrections in indigent defense and the right to counsel? And so I'm going to put that question to Deb because I know that she has a great answer.
Part of our concern with that is that with appropriate defense, that person very well may not be in state prison. The money that is spent on the front end is more effective, it's more efficient. We feel that the income that someone has should not indicate or dictate their outcome. So they need to have proper defense at bail, at arrest. Many times we have people that come in the system that could have gone through a diversionary court or a problem-solving court. And when they reach us, may have been incarcerated 6 times by the time they get to us. Their families are affected, their incomes are affected, their ability to work. And in some cases, with the appropriate defense, we feel that they would not be coming to us.
Thank you, Deb. I'm going to put that same question to John, who's a law professor and I know has been working in Pennsylvania. Why do you as a law professor care about the right to counsel and effective defense representation?
The experience I've had working with people who've been wrongfully convicted, one of the panelists said earlier that's a toxic situation, and it is. Anything we can do to sustain public confidence in our criminal justice system is a mission we should all be on. And so the motto we approach things in Allegheny County is whatever policies we design, they have to be demonstrably good for law enforcement, victims, and the accused. It's a quotient that works for everyone. And once you get everyone at the table to think that way, it's easier to sit down and discuss these things without competing with one another. The problems we have in Allegheny County are really a reflection of the kind of problems we have in Pennsylvania. We have a structural problem in Pennsylvania. And I'll just give you Allegheny County's snapshot. We have 119 municipal police agencies, 166 distinct agencies, 4,100 sworn officers, and nobody in charge. And yet our county, through this Criminal Justice Advisory Board, we've introduced, and then we migrate east statewide, and now it's adopted through our PDAA association, among others, best practices for eyewitness identification, interviews and interrogations being recorded. Recently, we passed body camera legislation, and largely this is a product of sitting down with everybody, from the media to the police to the prosecutors, the public defenders, every stakeholder. I learned early on that it's kind of like Noah's Ark. You have to have 2 of everything in the room when you start these projects, but it works in Allegheny County. And we're optimistic, cautious, but we're optimistic that we're going to learn from other experiences. We've just visited the Bronx Defenders and their holistic model for defense. We're very interested in what's happening in California. Your elder court as well, that your former elder court, there are things you're doing out there that are really pioneering. But we need to learn from other people. What we have to do in this process is suspend our egos and our vanities and our turf and recognize that the DAs and the PDs and the police can all sit in the same room. One last quick story. I chaired a statewide commission to study wrongful convictions some years ago, and the district attorney, a good friend, Steve Zappala, the public defender, Michael Mack, and a dear friend, and myself, we would drive up together. When the DAs and PDs from the rest of the Commonwealth found out we drove up together to Harrisburg, they thought there was something wrong with us. That's not a healthy environment. But in Allegheny County, we've managed to cut through that. That's why I'm hopeful for our county.
And more at the local level now, Dagny, can you talk about what you've done in Nevada and what your challenges have been with respect to right to counsel and indigent defense?
Sure, thanks. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of here to provide a local perspective from the perspective of the counties, the administrative and budget perspective too. Nevada is also one of those states where primarily indigent defense is funded and carried out by the counties. Nevada does have a state public defender, but that public defender works only for 2 counties, and the counties also contribute. Nevada doesn't really have a state level or statewide delivery system, as well as little to no oversight on the state level, save for a commission created by the Supreme Court mainly to study and advise regarding this issue. We have a lot of challenges in Nevada, but specifically I want to talk about the the urban counties, Clark and Washoe County, where Las Vegas and Reno are. Different situation. The county has a public defender, and so many of the issues that I'll discuss different in those counties. So Nevada's a huge state geographically, roughly 10 times the size of Massachusetts, and the far majority of that area outside of Reno and Vegas is rural. Nevada's Supreme Court organized an Indigent Defense Commission in 2008, and that commission outlined a number of issues with legal defense of the poor in rural Nevada. The Sixth Amendment Center helped with some of that research. Some of the things they found: large distances that attorneys have to travel, the existence of flat fee contracts out in our rurals, as well as generally a lack of funding to support indigent defense. So from the county perspective, the issue really is, of course, it's all about the money, and the issue is the lack of state support. In Nevada, counties pay about 97% of the overall costs. Most counties pay 100%, so they administer their indigent defense, their public offices of their public defenders, or administer those contracts. And only 2 of them, as I said, use the state public defender. So that's the biggest issue, I think, and the biggest barrier. The financial situation is pretty dire for some of our counties, and even for our state. Nevada doesn't have a state income tax. We have a cap on property taxes at the local level, and that's our main source of revenue. And though the economy and our nationally and our state economy is rebounding for the counties in Nevada, it's not the case. Over the last 5 years, county revenues have only increased just over 1%. So it's a really, as I said, dire situation. There's a number of unfunded mandates from the state put on counties, of course, including legal defense of the poor. So one example of how this specifically affects rural counties is for capital cases. We have a county with a budget of about 30 million people, and they had a murder trial in their county, and the amount that they spent to defend that individual was $1.6 million. So for a county with a budget of $30 million to spend $1.5 million, and that's a rural county that's larger than a lot of our counties, and we've got counties that if they had a capital case like that, that's it. They would be turning the keys over to the state if the state wasn't able to participate and support them in a capital case. Getting lawyers out to our rural counties is also an issue. Nevada only has 1 law school. It's down in southern Nevada, and there just aren't a lot of lawyers, northern Nevada and the rurals. And for those counties that have contracts, even one county, example, has a pretty generous contract. It's hard for them even to find a lawyer who will come out to that county, the northern part of that county, which is 4 to 5 hours from any large city. The housing isn't great, so it's hard just to even get bodies out to provide legal defense. I think, and I know I'm talking for a long time, so I'll just give one more. We have been proactive as an association. The Supreme Court has really taken a leadership role on this issue, but our association has as well. 4 out of the last 5 legislative sessions, we sponsored bills to address this issue. We didn't really make any progress. There have been other bills in addition to the ones that we have brought to address funding, to create a statewide commission and a statewide system. And so I guess one of the other big barriers is just the political barrier of getting support from the the state on this issue, getting some dollars. I think one of the reasons for that is because this is a big issue in the rurals, and we just don't have a lot of representation in our legislature for the rural areas. 9 out of our 63 legislators in Nevada are from the rural areas, and there just isn't the political clout, to get something done. So that's another barrier. And I could go into a little more about some of the things that we've tried to do, but I'll stop for now.
In a moment.
Okay, I'll stop.
Dagny actually mentioned something, that's obviously on the mind of anyone involved with indigent defense, and that's the matter of funding. And I'm going to direct a question first to Carlton, because at your level, there are so many competing entities requesting a limited amount of funding. Given all those competing funding priorities, why would you as an SAA decide to prioritize funding public defense?
I think one of your jobs as an SAA is to be mindful of the issues that we have in our overall system of criminal justice. One of the things that I tried to do when I became the SAA, and it worked out much better as we got a new state public defender, Tim Young, was to get to know my state public defender. We see applications, and sometimes it's very difficult. One of the reasons why you need to actually get out of your office and go out into the field is so you can see the impact of the funding decisions that you're making, and you get a better understanding for what you're dealing with. So while I had been a trial attorney and an appellate attorney, I have never been on the public defense side. And so I tried to form this relationship with Tim. We worked really well together. We actually came together and tried to apply for a grant together. It didn't work out. I think that was to BJA. I'm not sure. But I think you just have to be mindful of your overall criminal justice system. You have to understand where the weaknesses are, and you have to take pride in the system of justice that we have. You don't want to see areas of the system that are struggling. And so one of the things that we always try to do is to be ahead of the curve and to deal with issues prior to them emerging to the point where everyone decides someone needs to do something about that. And the only way that you can do that is to try to form these relationships and to be in contact with people and work with people. And when you do things that way, it makes you aware of things you might not otherwise be aware of, because it takes time for an issue to get to the point sometimes where everyone's screaming about it. We worked on human trafficking before most people knew what human trafficking was. And actually BJA came out and they had a regional conference, and they asked everyone by a show of hands who knows what human trafficking is, and like every hand in the room went up. But that was because we were out in the field, we had worked with people. And I think on the defense side, you just have to be aware. And part of it is my own personal experience. I was the clemency attorney for a governor for a period of time. I met a guy just called me. One day was attorneys came and visited me, and not actually attorneys, as investigators came and visited me one day, and they were seeking clemency for this individual. And the hard thing was I wanted to learn more about this case, but he didn't have an attorney, and they were looking for an attorney. So he did finally get an attorney, and this guy ended up getting clemency. The Innocence Project ended up representing him after a period of time. So it's one of those things where I think it's both a personal, maybe the experiences I've had in my life, the professional experiences that I've had as well, and then building those interpersonal relationships with players in the criminal justice system.
Thanks, Carlton. One of the things that Carlton talked about was innovation and starting some new projects, although not directly related to indigent defense. Deb, you and the Corrections Department have been working closely with John, I think, on some innovative programs, and if you could describe those.
Sure. One of the programs that we're doing is a pilot with Allegheny County, and it's really about indigent defense and bail reform, and it really came out of the last time that we were here and the Secretary spoke. And Professor Rego is heading that up with the CJAB, working with them to have a clinic. I don't want to kind of steal his thunder there, but he can talk eloquently about it. But we are thrilled to be working with Allegheny County. They're very progressive in what they do. And of all the counties that we had to look at, they were the one that the Secretary wanted to go to and to pitch this to them. And we're excited about it and to see what the outcomes will be, and hopefully that can be replicated eventually.
Thank you, Deb. Solutions or policy changes you've...
Sure. So in Nevada, we've been trying to institute some change to the situation regarding indigent defense. And the Supreme Court in Nevada, our state Supreme Court, Justice Michael Cherry's taken a leadership role in establishing a commission to, as I mentioned, look at the issues and study them. The Supreme Court issued a few orders. In 2015, they issued an order prohibiting flat fee contracts. And since then, most of our rural counties who had those have amended those to allow for additional fees. They also ordered the state to pay for capital cases, but the state at this point isn't willing or able to do that. So as I mentioned, our association also has tried to take a leadership role on this issue and have brought a number of bills over the last 4 or 5 legislative sessions. None of those have been that successful, but we've tried to seek additional funding through fees, tried actually to ask for additional statewide sales tax, tried to ask for the authority for counties to increase their sales tax. We were trying to ask for the authority to tax ourselves so that we could fund indigent defense more. And then we also had a bill to request that the state, to require the state to pay for any capital cases, which also didn't go anywhere. This is sort of a sad story that I'm telling here about Nevada. And then our last legislative session, there was a bill to create a statewide indigent defense commission and an independent commission, and the counties could opt in, and then the state would provide the defense. The counties were still willing to contribute the amount that they're contributing today, but the state would then contribute any additional costs for the administration of that system. That bill also did not make it. It turned into a right to commission counsel. So they actually created the counsel, right to counsel commission, I apologize. So that actually was created, and the folks were appointed to that, I think, just this week. And the charge of that commission is to study the issue further, but also come up with some funding solutions. They'll also have a bill draft going into the next session. And so we're hopeful that through what's actually a state-sanctioned independent commission, that we can make some progress on reform. And then finally, I don't know if it's an innovative solution, but definitely might force one. The ACLU has been threatening for some time to sue in Nevada, and we think that that lawsuit will probably happen very quickly, and that the state will likely be named. And so presumably that might help force the state's hand in coming to the table and helping counties, supporting them, and hopefully providing additional funding.
Thank you, Dave. John, one of the questions that I wanted to pose to you was how different system actors or segments work collectively to ensure the constitutional right to counsel and effective delivery of public defense services, and how your partnership with corrections developed that.
Well, you know, we're trying to do more with less, and I think everybody in this room is faced with that metric. And unfortunately, that's the way it's going to be for us for at least a while. And we discovered the following. You shouldn't look at a public defender's office and think, quote, I got stuck with a public defender. You should think that's my law firm. And a holistic approach, we've concluded, begins internally. You don't have to spend money. The men and women who are fine people and very good lawyers, many of them were former students, and not because of me, they're better because of me, in spite of me, I should say. But they have to start by believing in themselves. It starts close to home. They have to be, as much as we can support them, more engaged in the community and not an enigma to the community. We can't have the first time our defendants are meeting their lawyers or at the preliminary hearing. We need to be aggressive at the pre-arraignment and the arraignment stages. We need to understand their needs at that stage because of the collateral consequences they're facing. It could be immigration, family, housing. New York, for example, has a constitutional guarantee of shelter. You, as a public defender, your first instinct, somebody's smoking weed on the corner, look, just plead to something simple and pay the fine and go away. Well, instantly you're in housing court and all of a sudden your family's losing its house. Those kinds of civil partnerships or collateral consequences, I should say, exist. We don't think outside of that realm. You walk into our public defender's office, you feel like you're in a jail. You see bulletproof glass. You see unwelcome hallways, chairs that don't look right. They don't match. That may all seem insignificant, but as I looked at the Bronx model and similar models around the country, I've always believed when I didn't know anything, I always knew people responded to their environment. And I think we have to change the environment, and that's part of a cultural change. We can do this in Allegheny County without spending much money. It's an attitude. The aggression or the aggressive nature we want to take at the arraignment stage is because, as Deb has suggested, we think that's where we can get the biggest return on our investment of time and money. And so the programs we're designing there involve a much more active role for our public defenders there. For the last 8 months, our public defenders for the first time have been allowed to see the risk assessment and working with the court on bail determinations. And I can tell you when those bail determinations are reviewed a few days later, upwards of 70–80% of them are being changed. So we're putting filters in the system to try to address these concerns as early as possible. We also have interest on the back end on reentry, but I think if we're aggressive on entry at the arraignment stage, we're going to be more successful. One last point, Carnegie Mellon is doing a misdemeanor project that we're going to be working with them on. I mean, we have to engage the universities. We have a very active philanthropic community, and part of the secret for Pennsylvania, it lies in the Philadelphia Defender's Office. It's a very successful office. The reason, in my opinion, their independence. They are a nonprofit, and maybe this is the hybrid that states like us need. They're a nonprofit. They have an active philanthropic community there. They will help them with these innovations. I can't expect foundations or private individuals to pay for government services, but if you're a nonprofit and you can engage in this and show how these programs are helping to stabilize families while these people who are justice involved have to make their way through the system, that's just, I think we can show good returns over a period of time.
Thanks, John. Carlton, I'm going to ask that same question in terms of, the demand for limited funding. How do you feel that you and your compatriots should be messaging to the community, criminal justice community at large, the importance of funding for indigent defense?
Well, everything starts with funding. I mean, everything that we do, if someone's doing it, most of the time we're not doing anything for free, although it might feel like it. So funding that's where it all starts. I think the thing that we need to do is to really focus on our language at times. And I think we need to be allies, supporters of indigent defense. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to do this. Now, this is a fundamental mistake in law. So I would never do this in an actual case. I'm going to ask a question that I don't know what the answer is to. So we always know what the answer is. That's why we're asking the question. And that's why when you don't answer the question the way the lawyer thinks you're going to ask, they can go right to that deposition or whatever and say, well, you said this previously. So I'm going to ask this question. By a show of hands, how many people here have spent any time being concerned about being a victim of a crime? How about being wrongfully accused of committing a crime? So our attitudes, though, about the type of people who are, or the likelihood that you're going to end up being accused of a crime that you didn't commit. You know, all of these things have been put in place. All these protections have been put in place because people dealt with that experience of just, hey, you did this. You don't get to confront the witnesses against you. You don't have a right to counsel. You're going to jail right now. And we'll let you out at some point when we feel like it, right? That was what the experience was. And even in our language, the rights of the accused, do we talk about the accused? Maybe here we talk about the accused. But what do we hear? What do we hear when people talk about this? It's the rights of the victims against the rights of the criminals, right? Well, when are you a criminal? You're a criminal once you're convicted of a crime. Until that point, you're just accused of a crime. And so I think one thing that we have to do is talk about how important our justice system is and how, when you are that person, when you are the accused, it's not so-and-so versus John Doe. It's the state of Ohio, the resources of the state of Ohio. It's the United States versus, it's the power of the United States government against a single individual. And so resources become incredibly important. And so we have to make sure that people are in a position when the power of the government comes down on them, that they're in a position to defend themselves. Our system of justice, I remember I was asked to go speak to a group of people, families actually, who had lost loved ones to crime. And all their loved ones had lost someone, and all the criminals were on death row. And so I remember sitting there, and one of the attorneys, we actually had the state public defender was there with us, and one of the attorneys said, you know, this guy, the guy's name, I don't know, you might know, Greg Boddicker. One of the attorneys who was from our state public defender's office, his name's Greg Boddicker, and the attorney pointed him out and said, you want him to be a good attorney? And the families were kind of like, why? Why do I care? And he said, for two reasons. First, you want the person who actually did this to be the person who goes to prison. Because it doesn't do our system of justice any good. It doesn't make us any safer just to send someone to prison, right? Because if someone goes to prison and they're not the person, whoever did it's still out there committing crimes. And the second piece is, I did federal habeas corpus for a long time, and cases get reversed. You know why? Because bad attorneys make big mistakes. They make them at trial. They make them in the appellate process. And those cases get reversed. And then you know what happens when a death penalty case gets reversed, or any case gets reversed? If it's remanded to the trial court for trial, you have to have that trial all over again. How good do you think those witnesses are going to be a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later? I mean, I want everyone to remember what they ate for breakfast yesterday, let alone what they saw 10 years ago. So we really need good defense at the trial level. We need them to be well-funded, and people need to recognize that at any point in time, it could be you, not a criminal, but the accused, sitting at that table, and you're going to hope that there is a well-funded, well-trained person who can stand there with you and make sure that all the rights that are guaranteed to you are put into place.
Thanks, Carlton. Dagny, from at the county level, how would you message to other to counties why they should be prioritizing funding to indigent defense?
Well, I guess in one sense, I mean, in Nevada, they're the ones that do it already. So I'm not sure, you know, to the counties themselves and the commissioners that you need to make that argument. I think counties are the local social safety net. They're used to providing services to the most vulnerable in our communities. They sort of see themselves in that role. You know, they're responsible for indigent medical costs, county hospitals, contributions to the Medicaid system, as well as indigent defense in Nevada. So I think they understand that that's, you know, part of who we are as counties and what we do. And also county commissioners swear to uphold the Constitution as well. So, I mean, I think to a certain extent they get that, and, you know, the arguments need to be made to other actors in our state. I do think that there are, you know, practical arguments in terms of why better funding could be helpful just in terms of county administration and budgeting. You know, overcrowding of county jails is a huge issue across the country, I know, but also in Nevada. And, you know, in the rural counties, if someone is sitting in jail because their attorney's not showing up, you know, that can increase county budget costs. So I think budget impacts is one way to message it, but also I think they get that that's, you know, well, right now wholly in Nevada, but for most of them, but at least in part, their responsibility.
Thanks, Dagny. I think one of the messages that we've gotten today, not only from this panel, but from some of the others, and I think Judge Grasso was among those who said that, you know, good public defense or good criminal defense generally actually increases public safety by providing rehabilitation to those who need it, diverting those from incarceration to other programs that are going to make it less likely they can commit future crimes. And as Carlton was saying, I think one of the things that a message that's important is that the Sixth Amendment and all of those rights are to keep the system honest, to ensure the integrity of the criminal justice system. So it's not just, you know, why should we commit resources to do something for somebody who's committed a crime? It's to make our system stronger and to make it as good as it possibly can be. I think we're just about out of time, but I will invite questions from the audience if anybody has any for the panelists.
John, can I just have one thing?
Certainly.
I think Pennsylvania is the poster child for probably one of the most egregious Sixth Amendment violations, and it happened 5, 6, 7 years ago in Lucerne County with the Kids for Cash scandal. Some 4,000 kids ended up where they shouldn't be, and I think the number was 1,800 or 1,900 of them were deemed to have been violated in terms of their Sixth Amendment rights under GALT. If that's not a wake-up call, now that goes to quality as much as it goes to ethics and integrity. I get that. But if that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is. Pennsylvania's had 2 reports. In 2003, our Supreme Court issued a study. In 2011, our Joint State Commission issued a study, both calling an airstrike in on our indigent defense system. I do think in Allegheny County we're doing financially the best that we can under the limited circumstances we have, but we need private-public engagement for this to flourish. It's not going to, for states like us, it's not going to happen. We need private and public engagement.
Any other panelists have a closing comment? Was there a question? Won't stay on. Do any of the other panelists have any closing comments? Hearing none? Okay. Well, thank you for your kind attention.